You're replaceable, sweetheart. Those were the last words the new VP, Mark, said before tossing my termination letter across the conference table like I was a broken stapler. Everyone else in the room looked down, pretending not to see the humiliation written across my face. But I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just smiled, the kind of smile that makes people nervous because it hides something. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. My name's Chloe Bennett, and this is the story of how I turned that same company upside down. The one that thought I was replaceable. The day they fired me, the morning had started like any other. I arrived early, holding my usual caramel latte, ready to prepare for the board meeting. The air smelled like burnt coffee and ambition, the two strongest scents in that building. But something felt off. Conversations hushed as I walked by. People avoided eye contact. I'd worked there for 8 years, built the client acquisition model that generated over $200 million in contracts, and managed 3 of the company's biggest accounts. Yet suddenly, I was being treated like an outsider. At 9:30 a.m., I got an email. Urgent meeting, conference room B. When I entered, Mark, the newly appointed vice president, was sitting with the HR director and 2 legal advisors. I didn't even need to ask. His smirk said everything. Chloe, after reviewing your recent reports, we've decided your position has become redundant, he said, pretending to sound professional, but clearly enjoying every second. I folded my arms. Redundant? I literally just secured the Crown Tech renewal last week. That's $8 million in revenue. Mark shrugged. And yet your methods are outdated. We're restructuring to bring in more dynamic leadership. By dynamic you mean cheaper, I said flatly. His grin widened. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be. Sign the release, hand over your laptop and access keys, and we'll process your final paycheck. I paused for a moment. The HR rep slid a thick envelope toward me. The weight of it felt heavier than paper, like betrayal itself. But I didn't let them see me break. Instead, I signed my name, stood up, and placed my employee badge on the table. Good luck replacing me, I said quietly. Mark chuckled. Sweetheart, everyone's replaceable. As I walked out of that office for the last time, I glanced back at the company logo glowing on the wall, Rivers and Holt Consulting. 8 years of my life, endless nights, missed birthdays, and countless sacrifices for people who saw me as disposable. But what they didn't know was that they had just fired the one person keeping their empire standing. That night, as I sat in my apartment staring at my packed boxes and severance papers, my mind was spinning. I wasn't angry, at least not the loud kind of angry. Mine was the quiet kind, the kind that plans. I still had contacts, powerful ones. And those 3 top accounts they bragged about keeping? They weren't loyal to Rivers and Holt. They were loyal to me. One of them, Everstone Medical, called me the next morning. Chloe, what's going on? Mark just told us you left the company. Is that true? Let's just say it wasn't by choice, I replied. Well, the CEO said, we only signed our contract because of your strategic model. If you're not there, we'll reconsider. That was all I needed to hear. Within 3 weeks, all 3 major clients, Everstone Medical, Brighton Logistics, and Crown Tech Industries, withdrew their contracts. That was $30 million in business, gone overnight. Rivers and Holt was in chaos. Mark's smug confidence vanished the moment the CEO realized what had happened. And then came the inevitable, the phone call. Chloe, this is Mr. Rivers. We need to talk. It's urgent. I leaned back in my chair, sipping coffee, smiling as the city lights shimmered through my apartment window. Oh, Mr. Rivers, I said calmly. I thought I was replaceable. That was just the beginning. Because what they didn't know, what no one knew, was that I had built something deep into my employment contract. A small clause, just one line, that would soon bring their entire company to its knees. And when their lawyer finally read it, his face turned white. He looked at the CEO, voice trembling, and whispered just 2 words. Oh my God. The morning after that desperate phone call from Mr. Rivers, I woke up to over a dozen missed calls, for voicemails, and an email marked, urgent, please respond. I didn't respond to any of them. Not yet. Instead, I took a slow sip of my coffee, scrolled through my messages, and smiled. For the first time in years, I felt calm.
Free.
In control. When they fired me, I had walked out with my dignity intact, and a signed, airtight contract they clearly hadn't read properly. The clause I'd added had been approved years ago when I renegotiated my position after saving their biggest client. It was buried deep in the fine print, under a section nobody paid attention to: intellectual ownership and retention rights. It stated that any client model, strategy framework, or analytical system designed under my management remained joint intellectual property, meaning if I left, they couldn't use it without my written consent. And guess what? Every major account they had, Everstone, Brighton, Crown Tech, was running on my proprietary model. Without it, their systems collapsed. Emails flooded in from clients asking for explanations. Contracts were suspended. The company's stock value dropped 18% in 2 weeks. Mark, the new VP, went from visionary to corporate disaster practically overnight. By the third week, I started getting calls from mutual connections, executives whispering about emergency meetings, nervous investors, and internal blame games. Then came another email. This one was from the CEO himself. Subject: urgent. Meeting request. Chloe, we need to discuss your prior employment contract and your involvement in client retention systems. Please respond immediately. We'd like to meet this Friday. I laughed. Now, they wanted to talk. It felt surreal. Just weeks ago, I was disposable. Now, they were begging me to come back. I forwarded the email to my lawyer, Ethan Pierce, who'd been helping me quietly since I left. He called within minutes. Chloe, he said, his voice half amused, half impressed. They're panicking. I've never seen a company this sloppy with their legal review. I know, I replied. They were too busy replacing me to realize they were standing on a legal landmine. Ethan chuckled. You're not just holding the upper hand. You are the hand. Friday came faster than I expected. The meeting was set at the company's downtown office, the same building I'd walked out of a month ago. As I stepped out of the elevator, heads turned. Whispering filled the hallways. I could practically feel the tension radiating through the walls. Mr. Rivers was already in the conference room, pacing. His face was pale, eyes bloodshot, like he hadn't slept in days. Mark sat beside him, avoiding my gaze completely. HR and the company's in-house counsel were there too. Chloe, Mr. Rivers started, forcing a smile. Thank you for coming. We've had unforeseen issues since your departure. I heard, I said coolly. Seems like your replacement strategy didn't go as planned. He swallowed hard. Let's be professional. We're in a tough spot, and we think it's in everyone's best interest if you return. Temporarily, of course, to help stabilize the accounts. Return? I repeated, raising an eyebrow. You mean the same position I was fired from? Rivers glanced nervously at Mark before nodding.
Yes.
You'd retain your seniority and pay. We just need you back for now. I leaned back in the chair. And what happens when I fix your mess? Do I get replaced again?
His jaw tightened.
Let's not make this harder than it needs to be. I looked over at their lawyer. Have you reviewed my employment contract? He shuffled his papers. We're aware of certain clauses. Certain clauses? I interrupted, smiling. You mean Section 14C, under intellectual ownership? The room went quiet. Mark frowned. That section's standard legalese. No, Mark, I said sharply. It's not. That clause states that all client systems developed under my supervision remain my property, meaning the company cannot legally operate those accounts or models without my written consent. Mr. Rivers looked at the lawyer, who froze mid-page. Is that accurate? He asked. The lawyer's face turned pale. He nodded slowly. Yes, sir. It's quite clear. I stood, gathering my folder. So, unless you'd like to be sued for breach of contract and unauthorized use of proprietary systems, I'd suggest we stop pretending you hold the power here. Rivers tried to regain control. We can negotiate. You already had your chance to negotiate, I said. Now I'm the one offering terms. I leaned forward, my tone cold but steady. I'll consider helping you. but it'll be on my terms, not yours. I want a new contract, full creative control, and a 10% equity stake. Otherwise, I walk." Rivers blinked. "Equity? That's insane." "Not as insane as losing another $30 million, I replied. The room fell silent. I could see the lawyer's expression, a mix of disbelief and reluctant respect. Rivers rubbed his temples, defeated. "We'll review your proposal." As I walked out of that room, the same hallways that once echoed with whispers of my downfall now buzzed with something else. Fear. For the first time in my career, I wasn't the one begging for validation. They were. And I wasn't done yet, because the best part of revenge was still coming. The next week, I was officially back in the same company that had once thrown me out like yesterday's trash. But this time, things were different. I wasn't returning as an employee desperate to please anyone. I came back as the storm they never saw coming. Rivers and Holt had no choice but to rehire me on my terms: double salary, full project control, and direct reporting access to the CEO. They didn't grant me the 10% equity yet, but the negotiations weren't over. I made sure that clause was sitting at the top of their next agenda. When I entered the office on my first day back, the same faces that had avoided me before now plastered on fake smiles. The air was thick with tension. You could almost hear the whispers bounce off the glass walls. Mark was still there, though his confidence had evaporated. He looked like a man walking on eggshells, his smile tight, his tone forced. "Welcome back, Chloe," he muttered when I walked by. I smiled sweetly. "Thanks, Mark. Try not to replace me this time." The look on his face? Priceless. Over the next few days, I reviewed the client files they'd ruined in my absence. Every report was a disaster. Projections were off, relationships were strained, and systems were broken. I could have fixed everything in a week, but I didn't.
No, I took my time.
Because sometimes revenge isn't loud. It's slow, methodical, and surgical. I started by calling each of my old clients personally. "Hey, it's Chloe," I'd say warmly. "I'm back at Rivers and Holt, temporarily." Each of them was thrilled to hear my voice, but cautious. They'd been burned once already. I reassured them that I was handling their projects directly now. The trust they had in me returned instantly. But behind the scenes, I was doing something much bigger. I started documenting everything, every mismanagement decision, every overlooked clause, every unethical order from the higher-ups. I built a paper trail so detailed that it could crush the company from the inside if I wanted. Ethan, my lawyer, reviewed my notes regularly. "Chloe," he said one evening over dinner, "you're building a case stronger than anything I've seen. You could own them by the time this is done." I sipped my wine, smiling faintly. That's the plan. Meanwhile, Mark was falling apart. He knew the board was blaming him for the $30 million loss. He started sending me awkward apology emails and invitations to collaborate. I ignored most of them. Then one morning, he made the mistake of confronting me in the hallway. "Look, Chloe," he started, nervously adjusting his tie. "I think we got off on the wrong foot." "Oh? Was it when you fired me, called me replaceable, or when you almost sank the company?" I replied. He blinked rapidly. "It wasn't personal. It was to me," I said, leaning in closer. "And trust me, Mark, I don't forget easily." He didn't have a response. Just silence. That same suffocating silence he'd once used against me. By the end of the week, word spread. The company's biggest clients were returning, thanks to me. The CEO looked relieved. Investors began smiling again. And suddenly, Rivers and Holt was pretending they'd always believed in me. But I wasn't there for their approval. I was there for closure. On Friday, I got an invite to a special board meeting scheduled for Monday morning. The subject line: New Contract Proposal, Ownership Terms. I knew exactly what that meant. They were going to offer me my 10% equity, but I also knew they'd try to play dirty. The same old tactics, hidden legal traps, and promises that meant nothing.
So, I prepared.
That weekend, Ethan and I reviewed my entire employment history with the company. We cross-referenced every old amendment, every revised contract, every NDA. That's when Ethan noticed something odd. "Chloe," he said slowly, This clause here, under your rehire agreement, it references your original contract, not the new one. I frowned. Meaning? Meaning the terms from your first contract still apply, including the ownership clause from Section 14C. My heart skipped. So even though I came back, they're still using systems that technically belong to me? Exactly, Ethan said. If they didn't rewrite this properly, they've just given you permanent control over every client system they operate. Not just the ones you built, all of them. I leaned back, stunned. This was bigger than revenge. This was power. And Monday morning I was going to use it. As I walked into the office that day, dressed in a black power suit, the air felt electric. Everyone knew something was about to happen. The boardroom was full. Executives, legal teams, even Mark, who looked like he wanted to melt into his chair. Rivers smiled nervously as I sat down. Chloe, thank you for coming. We've reviewed your proposal and we're ready to make an offer. I folded my hands. I'm listening. He slid a document across the table. We're prepared to grant you equity, as long as you transfer all client ownership rights back to the company. Standard practice. I tilted my head. You mean the rights I already own? The lawyer stiffened. Rivers looked confused. What do you mean? I smiled, reaching into my folder. You might want to have your lawyer read this. I handed him a single piece of paper, a copy of the clause Ethan had highlighted. The lawyer's eyes flicked over it once, then again and again. His expression changed from curiosity to horror. The room fell silent. And then, very slowly, the lawyer looked up at the CEO and whispered, "Oh my God." The sound of those 3 words, "Oh my God," echoed through the boardroom like a gunshot. Everyone froze. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Mr. Rivers, the CEO, blinked in confusion. What is it? What's going on? The company lawyer looked pale, his fingers trembling as he adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. Sir, this clause gives Chloe permanent proprietary rights over every operational framework she's created and every system built upon those frameworks. Rivers frowned. English, please. The lawyer swallowed hard. It means we don't legally own any of the systems our clients are currently using. The room erupted in murmurs. Executives looked at each other in panic. Mark sat motionless, face drained of color. I leaned back in my chair, calm and collected. You might want to reread Section 14C and 14C.2, specifically. The lawyer turned the page quickly, his eyes widening even more. Oh my God, it's even worse. It says if her intellectual property is used without written consent, she's entitled to royalty compensation at full contract value. The words hung heavy in the air.
Full contract value.
That meant every dollar they had earned using my systems, all of it, legally belonged to me. Rivers' voice cracked. That can't be right. I smirked. You should have read before you signed. I tried to warn you, but you were too busy calling me replaceable, remember? Mark's head dropped into his hands. I could almost feel the fear rolling off him. Rivers turned red with anger. Chloe, this is absurd. You're holding the company hostage. I stood slowly, placing both hands on the table. No, Mr. Rivers. You held me hostage for years. You took my ideas, my time, my loyalty. You fired me like trash. I'm just reclaiming what was mine all along. The lawyer spoke up again, nervously flipping through the pages. Legally, she's right. This is a binding clause. And since the new rehire contract references her original terms, there's nothing we can do unless she agrees to release it. Rivers' voice broke. So, what are you saying? The lawyer sighed. I'm saying she owns us. The boardroom went dead silent. I let the moment sink in. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out a small folder, my proposal. I came prepared, I said, sliding it across the table. If you want to keep using my systems, we'll need to renegotiate terms. Rivers' eyes darted to the folder like it was a snake. What terms? I smiled faintly.
Simple.
I want everything I asked for, 10% equity, lifetime royalties, and full creative control. And while we're at it, Mark resigns effective immediately. Mark's head snapped up.
What?
You can't. Mark, I said sharply, cutting him off. You fired me. Now it's my turn. The CEO rubbed his temples. This is blackmail. I shrugged. No, this is business. You built your success on my back. Now you can pay for the privilege. The lawyer leaned toward Rivers, whispering something I couldn't hear. The CEO's face grew darker with every word. Finally, he looked at me, defeated. You'll destroy this company if we refuse. I tilted my head. That's your choice. But remember, the moment you breach that clause again, I'll have legal grounds to seize your assets. No one said a word. You could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock. Finally, Rivers nodded slowly. You'll have your equity. And Mark, he looked across the table, voice low and final. Clean out your office.
Now.
Mark's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He stood shakily, grabbed his folder, and left the room without looking at anyone. It was poetic, watching the man who called me replaceable being replaced himself. Once he was gone, I leaned forward and smiled at the CEO.
See?
That wasn't so hard. Rivers sighed. You've made your point, Chloe. Oh, I'm not done yet, I said softly. I also want a clause added that recognizes my intellectual property as independent of the company, permanently. The lawyer blinked. That would make you a co-owner of all future systems developed using your framework. Exactly, I said. So, even if I walk away again, you'll still owe me for every success you achieve. Rivers sat back, defeated. You're ruthless. I smiled faintly.
No.
Just fair. He signed the new agreement that day. The lawyer handed me the finalized papers, and I looked down at my name beside co-owner. It felt surreal. The same people who once discarded me were now bound to me, legally, financially, permanently. When the meeting ended, I walked out of that boardroom with quiet satisfaction. The same halls that once felt cold and cruel now echoed with whispers of awe and fear. As I reached the elevator, the receptionist, a young woman I'd mentored years ago, looked up from her desk and smiled. Welcome back, Ms. Bennett. I smiled warmly. Thanks, Emily. But I'm not back. I'm just getting started. The elevator doors closed, and for the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. They took everything from me, my pride, my stability, my career. And I took it all back with interest. But what I didn't realize then was that my revenge wasn't over. Because my new power inside the company was about to open doors I never imagined and reveal secrets that would shake everything they built. A week later, I sat in my new office, the one that used to belong to Mark. Funny how poetic justice works. Same corner window, same view of downtown Chicago. But everything felt different. My nameplate gleamed on the desk. Chloe Bennett, co-owner and chief strategy officer. The company that once threw me away now had to rely on me to survive. The first thing I did was call a staff meeting, not with executives, but with the actual team. The developers, analysts, and coordinators who kept the place running, the people who were never invited to the fancy meetings. They filed into the room cautiously, unsure what to expect. I smiled warmly. I know most of you remember how things used to be, I began. Toxic. Competitive. Unfair. Heads nodded around the room. Well, I said, folding my arms, that ends today. From now on, this company runs on respect and transparency. No one here is replaceable, not anymore. A few people smiled. Some even clapped softly. It wasn't much, but it was a start. After the meeting, Emily, the same receptionist who had greeted me before, came up to me. You really did it, she said, eyes wide. You stood up to them.
Everyone's been talking about it.
I chuckled softly. Yeah, well, sometimes standing up looks a lot like falling apart first. She nodded thoughtfully. Still, it's kind of inspiring. That word, inspiring, hit deeper than I expected. Because somewhere along the way, my revenge had turned into something bigger. It wasn't about humiliation anymore. It was about transformation. A few weeks passed, and the company began to recover, slowly but surely. The new systems I introduced rebuilt trust with clients, and we even signed 2 new accounts. Rivers avoided me most days, which suited me fine. He'd realized what true leadership looked like, and that he'd been blind to it all along. One evening, as I was packing up to leave, I found an email in my inbox. It was from Mark. Subject: I owe you an apology. Chloe, I know there's no reason for you to forgive me. I was cruel and arrogant. I let my ego get in the way of recognizing your worth. You didn't deserve how I treated you. I hope one day you'll accept my apology. Mark. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed 2 words. I accept. Not for him, but for me. Because holding on to anger would only anchor me to a version of myself that I had already outgrown. Months later, I got invited to a national tech leadership conference. They asked me to give a talk titled From Fire to Founder, Reclaiming Your Power in the Corporate World. Standing on that stage, looking out at hundreds of faces, I told my story, not as a victim, but as proof. Proof that sometimes losing everything is the only way to learn your worth. Proof that revenge doesn't always mean destruction. Sometimes it's about redefinition. I finished my talk with the same words that had carried me through it all. They called me replaceable. But the truth is, I was the foundation they tried to build without. And when it cracked, they finally saw the blueprint. The audience erupted in applause. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt peace. Later that night, I took a quiet walk along the Chicago Riverwalk. The city lights reflected off the water like stars scattered across the surface. I stopped, closed my eyes, and breathed deeply. I had started this journey broken, desperate to prove my worth to people who didn't care. Now, I stood here knowing I didn't need their validation. I was more than the title they gave me, more than the paycheck they offered, more than the way they dismissed me. I was Chloe Bennett, the woman who turned betrayal into power, the woman who made an empire regret underestimating her, the woman who turned replaceable into a legacy. And as the wind brushed past me, I smiled and whispered, sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming everything they said you couldn't. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this revenge story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more powerful stories every week.